Howdy, and welcome to LeeReads, where I talk about the books I've been reading and enjoying lately. Sci-Fi September was a great success. It was helpful that I did some book brainstorming, which I posted, and it really gave me a foundation from which to draw my book selections from. But I didn't only read science fiction, so I'll talk about the non-sci-fi ones at the end, but first, let's kick it off with a classic, Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur C. Clarke. I always get a little nervous when talking about classics, specifically classic science fiction, because this was published 15 years before I was born, and I have been exposed to so much science fiction in various forms of media that's kind of the lens through which I'm experiencing these stories. And I try to put myself in the shoes of people who were reading this in the late 70s, or early 70s actually, when it came out only a few years after the moon landing, and science fiction was a very different thing than what it is now. This story is about an object that enters our solar system. It reminded me a lot of The Expanse, and in fact probably the authors of The Expanse drew from Arthur C. Clarke's world, where you have different governments on the Earth, Mars, the Moon, different planets, and people are able to travel within the solar system. So there was somebody there that could go explore this object, and as they get there and land on it, it becomes clear that it is not what they originally thought, and this exploration becomes more in depth, and unexpected things start to happen that this crew needs to survive and investigate. They're trying to determine what are the impacts of it on our home planets within the solar system, and not everyone agrees with how it should be dealt with. As I was reading it, I kept thinking, oh, this reminds me of The Expanse, when I realized that the proper ways, this was the foundation for that work. I found the investigation part and the stuff in the UFO, like starting to do weird things, to be kind of the most exciting, interesting part of this story. And when I finished it, I looked at my husband and I said, I finished it, and I didn't know what to think about it because it definitely has an open ending. So I feel like I'm gonna have to read the next books in the series to try to get a little bit more closure. So I can really see why this was foundational, and I am glad that I read this one. I also read a couple of my highly anticipated science fiction eARCs. The first one is These Burning Stars, which is a space opera. This one is quite complicated when it comes to the political scene, how the religion impacts everything. It's also a bit of a heist story. So you have someone slightly on the wrong side of the law who has gotten their hands on an important object that those in power want. And the power structure in the setup is broken down between like the religious lines and then house lines who basically control different aspects of the trade, mining for materials that are important for the jump gates, things like that. So one of these very important families wants this object back for their own reasons, and also one of the pillars of the religious orders wants this object back. Two sort of priests in this religion are sent after the con person, the hacker that has the data. It gets very complicated once you have these characters starting to interplay because their backgrounds are so varied, their motivations. They're not necessarily good people. I didn't like all of the characters in the story, but I found each of the perspectives to be fascinating and tell you something about this world, this universe. And also the stakes kept getting higher. There was a lot of action in the story, and even though it's a long one, I read it fairly quickly because it was really hard to put down. I think that one's coming out very soon, sometime this fall, These Burning Stars. And it's one that I would recommend that you pick up if you're interested in space opera with a political kind of heist, almost thriller-esque twist to it. and some really badass but also kind of awful characters in it. The next advanced copy that I read was Generationship by Mike Mamay, and this one is way different because it's really focused on what the name suggests, the generationship. These people have been on the ship for a couple of 100 years. This charter governs how things work for this very long voyage, and now they finally have reached the destination planet. And that's when things start falling apart a little bit, because the old rules that used to make sense to keep humanity within this generation ship afloat, now suddenly they don't make sense when there's a planet and new resources right there. These different factions start springing up on the ship, and just how it all kind of blows up, I thought was a really practical, real world look at what would probably happen in that situation, and how things may spiral out of control because people just kind of want to CYA, or they have different goals and motivations than other groups, and it can be really hard for them to communicate. So this one was a really character heavy, interpersonal heavy space opera, and in fact I wish we had a little bit more of the planet itself. I think it does a really good job at examining how humans would react to this very unique situation in a realistic way, and then you just sort of watch this mess unfold, which I got a little bit frustrated with some of the characters at times, but yet on the other hand you could understand why they were doing what they were doing, and it is a standalone. In audiobook form, I read Children of Memory, which is the last book in the Children of Time trilogy by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and I thought that this book might be my favorite out of all three of them, because I really connected with some of the characters. Each book in this trilogy has been so different in kind of what it focuses on and how it's advancing these different types of people that come together, yet they definitely build on one another. They're connected through the various times that you explore, and also these different types of species people that you see grow throughout the trilogy. This one was a lot more focused in a particular place, and yet it wasn't straightforward at all. I thought it was a really great conclusion to the trilogy, and if you haven't tried Children of Time yet and you like space opera, I really think that you should try it. And then I picked up a science fiction novella, which unbeknownst to me was actually book 3 in this science fiction romance series. But true to kind of how romance series goes, it followed a new set of characters, so I didn't even realize that there were two preceding novellas in this world, because you had plenty of context for the story. It follows two heads of very powerful houses that they're led by what used to be a warrior class of people back like in the history of humanity, that these people had certain skills that were highly valued for making war, and now they don't really have too much to do with each other. Each of these houses kind of does their own thing, but when the spouses of the heads of each of these houses double cross them, they steal from each house like some very secret important technological information from each house, and then run off together with this information. The heads of the houses have to come together to get their information back and try to figure out who wanted to buy this information and why, and stop it. I don't want to say too much to give away the plot, but I thought that the kind of combat mechanics were really unique, how the technology was woven in with that, and the conflicts of the characters. It wasn't a superficial thing like, oh, we're rival houses, we shouldn't really be seen with each other. The issues that the two characters were dealing with, it was more than just surface level, so it made getting to know the characters really satisfying to see how the story concluded. And actually, I'm going to go back now and read the first book in the series, because I really enjoyed book 3, and hopefully it doesn't spoil anything for me. We'll see. Then there were two non-sci-fis that I read. The first was Talonsister, which I did a relaxed reading vlog over. This is a recently released adult fantasy that I thoroughly enjoyed due to the combination of the complicated characters and the conflict that they had with each other and how the magic worked with the world building. For more detail on Talonsister, check out that reading vlog, but I highly, highly recommend it. Then I also read the third book in the Vaudrey Brothers trilogy, which was a historical romance set in like medieval England. This character is the king's champion in the joust and tournament, and the heroine character is a very down-to-earth, studious woman who doesn't really understand this frivolity, this obsession with tournaments, doesn't really get it. They wind up in a compromising situation that then it's like this arranged marriage that happens and they have to work through that. The entire trilogy was just a fun historical romance trilogy. It's really something outside my wheelhouse. I don't normally read historical romance, and especially the kind of arranged marriage trope, but I thought that this author did a really good job with the characters especially. So that is what I read in September. I had a very successful sci-fi September. I didn't get to everything on my potentials list, and there's still plenty there that I want to read and do plan on reading soon. But I'm also very happy that I read several of the eARCs on my list. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you share any of my thoughts on the books that I discussed, or let me know if anything else I talked about sounds interesting to you. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, don't forget to support your local library. Thanks.